Welcome to the Beyond the Veil Summit, a free online event where you'll explore the mysteries surrounding near-death experiences, mediumship, and the science of the afterlife. Share this event with your friends and family, and come join us on Facebook at The Shift Network. And now your host, Lisa Bonis.
Welcome to this session of the Beyond the Veil Summit with my guest, Dr. Nicole Gruel. Our topic today is We Were Made to Experience the Extraordinary. Dr. Nicole Gruel is an author, speaker, mama, multiple near-death experiencer, and specialist in spiritual health who descends from a 700-year lineage of samurai. She inspires people to harness their spiritual and transformative experiences for life prosperity, joyful livelihood, and to become the agent of awesome they were meant to be. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Lisa, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you because you've got a pretty amazing story. As I mentioned in your bio, you've actually experienced multiple NDEs, but you say that fortunately, we don't have to nearly die to access and harness the power of these extraordinary experiences, that we're each hardwired to experience the extraordinary in our own unique way. So let's go ahead and start with your near-death and other extraordinary experiences. Would you tell us about them, please?
I'd love to, and absolutely. I'd never wish it upon anybody, but if someone has those experiences, there's always gold to be mined within them. So a little bit about my own experiences. The first NDE was when I was 14 years old and whitewater rafting in New Zealand. And we went down this gorgeous big waterfall, and it was 10 meters. I'm not sure what that is in feet, but it's very high. And we did the drop, and it was so thrilling the first time that we decided to do it a second time. So down we go the second time, but of course this time the boat tips over. And I was thrown out of the boat, and I had a swimmer's reaction because I grew up a strong swimmer. So I put my arms out to try and swim. But that's the wrong reaction to have when you have this massive waterfall coming on top of you. And so it actually pushed me very, very deep down into the black water. And I opened my eyes and everything was dark. So I had total vertigo. I didn't know which way was up or down. So there was no point in swimming, and I realized that. And then came a moment of sheer panic. I don't know which way to swim. This is my last breath. Uh-oh. And straight after that moment of panic came absolute calm and stillness. It was as quick as that. And in front of me in the black water with my eyes open, I saw a horizon of light open up. And from that horizon of light, walking towards me was my samurai grandmother. So my grandmother, who was actually living at that time, she's now passed on, and my first dog. And as an only child, pets were like my siblings. They were very important to me. So those two beings were walking towards me in this horizon of light. And then I heard a male voice here say very clearly, Nicole, remember to breathe. And then something kicked in my frontal cortex, and I remembered what the instruction was, which was to curl up like a ball because I had a life jacket on. So I did that, and then my body rose to the surface of the water, and I came out in the whitewash. And fortunately, they plucked me out just before I got washed into this little crevice cave-like area, because it would have been my death experience that day had I gone any further. So they grabbed me out. That was great. And we were just happy to be alive. And that was the end of it on that day. I didn't ponder on it. I didn't reflect on it. That was that. And again, because I was 14, children who have near-death experiences tend to be different in many ways than adults that have them, simply because we haven't got our full worldview shaped at that point. So I purely took it on as what it was. I didn't question it, and on I went with my life. So that was the big one, the first one. Then at around age 30, I had what we call a near-death-like experience. And this is where I didn't physically die, but my body went through such a state that it caused my psyche to go through a death experience. So in a nutshell, it was a 3-day long process that happened spontaneously. I went in and out of ordinary states and non-ordinary states of consciousness, no substances, just as it was. And I had high fevers and I couldn't move off the couch. And in that process, after 3 days, layers of my psyche were stripped off faster and faster, like the peeling of an onion, to the point where there was absolutely nothing left of my identity except for a pinprick of light. I literally saw a pinprick of light. And I knew in that moment, and it was brutal. It was a really brutal experience that had gone through a lot of ancestral healing from my past, a lot of healing from this lifetime and previous lineages that I knew I was carrying and holding, but I wasn't conscious of. So it was very shamanic in tone, and it was also quite Kundalini-like in tone, because there was also a clearing that happened. And I knew with absolute certainty, once that pinprick of light came, that I am nothing more and I am nothing less than this. That's that. And life completely changed after that point, because I became much lighter, actually. After that point, life became a game. I knew that I was an active co-creator in this thing, in this body, in this experience that we get to have. And the third experience that's important, and mind you, and listeners I'm sure will understand this as well, often there are constellations of experiences like stars. There's big ones, there's little ones, they happen all over the place. But I'm giving you kind of three of the, what do you call those big star formations, the big one, the supernovas amongst the constellations. And the third one was more recent, when I birthed my baby girl. And that one, I haven't seen this term in the literature. It might be out there, but I'm calling it a shared near-death experience. Simply, I can't verify it for her because she was a child being born, and maybe that's a conversation we'll have at a later date. But in the experience, I had a natural labor, 90 hours in, 90, and things started to get a bit hairy after 90 hours, and the medical people really escalated the process because they were quite concerned for the child's health and mine. So in the midst of all of that, and in the birthing suite, I'm at the hospital by now, and they finally gave me some happy gas. That was the first painkiller I'd had. And there was something about the exhaustion of 90 hours, the exhaustion that comes with birthing and that intensity, which all mamas and parents will know, and the happy gas that triggered a spontaneous experience. And I returned in that moment to the exact same horizon of light that I was at when I had that first near-death experience. Only this time, of course, many years later, I knew exactly where I was. I knew what was going on, and I had language for it. So I had two levels of consciousness. One was in the room, and I was able to communicate with my family and the medical staff that were there. And the other was having this horizon of light experience again. And I said to my loved ones, I'm having a near-death experience. One of us might not make it, and it's going to be okay. Fortunately, we both made it through that experience. We were both absolutely fine. But the pediatrician said to me later on, she said it was lucky they took the baby out. It was an emergency cesarean in the end. And it was lucky they took the child out when they did, because had it been a couple of hours later, they would have been reviving her in the room. So to me, that indicates to me, that's why I call it a shared near-death experience. We were both very close, and I got to revisit that place. And it gave me a refresher. By this stage, I've been working with experiencers, talking a lot about this kind of stuff. And I had to laugh in that moment of cosmic, hysteria that this is not the experience at all that I wanted, and it's absolutely perfect. And thank you, universe, for this refresher. Yes.
Wow. That's quite a set of circumstances. Wow. So now I understand that this rather led to your doctoral research, which explored life-changing, non-ordinary, transcendent experiences like this. So what did you discover?
Wonderful things. So the doctoral research had happened prior to the birthing, and one of the key things that came out of the research, I was really interested in people who'd had life-changing, non-ordinary experiences, and what happens in the immediate after effects, what happens in the long-term after effects, and how does our personality have an impact in that. I'm in love with Jung's description of personality types and what he goes into with that. And so that was the framework I used to really understand how our conscious self deals with those things that are beyond the conscious. And the main finding that came out, which totally surprised me and I hadn't anticipated, was that our personality, our natural structures that, you know, we're hardwired, we know this from neuroscience, this is just part of who we are, we both nature and nurture, that actually those dimensions that have been described in the literature widely have spiritual dimensions. And when we have these experiences, it's like these parts of us, they have a knob on a radio and it's like they can get turned on. The frequency can become higher. And so who we already are at our core, it seems that these experiences make that core essence that we are stronger, more dynamic, more mature in many ways. Sometimes because of the intensity of the experiences, especially if it's a situation of spiritual emergency or a sudden emergence, those tendencies can actually go overboard as well, or in the acute period of the experience. So say, for example, there's a bit of a stereotype that introverted people or intuitive people tend to be more spiritual than others. And I'd heard this widely. I'd been within the typology community for almost 20 years. So I was very used to these conversations, and anything around spirituality I was always very keen to hear about. And that's what was surprising about hearing these stories and doing this research, was it showed me that's actually not true. It's not true. Intuitive types, introverted types, extroverted types, those that are based in sensation or the thinking rational modes, each has their own portal and doorway into connection with the sacred and the extraordinary. They are done in different ways, and each of those truly is a gift. And when we can understand how comprehensive that is and how different all of these pathways are, and we learn a bit of appreciation for that, now we can have that beginner's mind to say, wow, that's the perspective you bring in about what the sacred might be, or the non-ordinary. And it's also why in spiritual communities where sometimes we really can misunderstand one another and one another's experiences, and we can fall into those dangerous potholes of making assumptions. We wear our own lenses because we all, we're all limited by the lenses that we wear. And it's so easy to think, well, I see it this way, I've had this revelation, or I've had this experience, and this is my understanding of truth with a capital T, and therefore that's how it must be for everybody else. And that is not the case. So this, to me, I just found this so fascinating, and it really excited me to understand more about, wow, so those thinking people that are all about, strategizing and organizing the external world, or they're all about, if they're an introverted thinking type and they're all about the blueprints and the maps, what is it that happens for them when that veil is lifted and the sacred is switched on? And, they come out with these glorious maps of interconnection and cosmic understanding and languaging that is so different from one who might reach that through meditative states, or intuitive language, or artistic language, for example, or music. They're all simply different modes that we have based on personality or influenced by personality that come back in and weave into the greater tapestry of humanity. It's so rich. And frankly, I think it's a miracle we can understand each other.
An excellent point. Now, what I'm learning as I'm talking to people in this summit is that NDEs aren't what the average person thinks. That an NDE is you died. You are clinically dead, proven by doctors you're gone for a long, long time. You go up and you talk to baby Jesus or whatever your religious bent is, and then you come back into your body and you're changed forever. But that's not really what most people who experience NDEs have to say about it. It's what you're talking about here is these transformative experiences where you can even have this by using plant medicines or Kundalini awakenings, meditations, etc. And I love the way that you're saying that they all sort of give you a peek into what's beyond the veil. So yeah, I don't really necessarily have a question to follow that up other than, wow. But let's talk about the veil specifically. What is your view on what is the veil? What is it between us and this other mind-blowing information?
I love that question. I see it as layers of perception. Perception, we all have access. We all have access. And so for me, it's having a greater ability to see what is already there. And so whether we see it visually, inner visually with these inner eyes, from these eyes being able to see to these eyes. And that's actually a little interesting segue. There are people who have had near-death experiences who are visually blind and yet come back from their experiences talking about things that they have seen. So that's just one other fascinating conversation in itself. But layers of perception, because what I find, whether it's a near-death experience, which is one type of non-ordinary experience, it's a very extreme one, particularly the death. There are some people in the NDE community now that are calling them death experiences as opposed to near-death experiences because you do clinically die. And there are also others that would identify, as I do, as having near-death experiences who weren't in a hospital, who didn't have all of the mechanisms to say you're clinically dead, and yet all of the features or many of the features on the typical checklist of what can happen in such an experience are there. So those are a very extreme end of the spectrum. And then, of course, you have so many different types. There are hundreds of types of non-ordinary experiences. There are researchers, Rhea White and Suzanne Brown, who did work in the exceptional human experiences area, actually at one point categorized, I think they were up to about 500 different type of non-ordinary experiences. And those can then be classified into different groupings as well, which, the Groffs have done and others have classified beautifully. So, that goes back to that point about you don't have to die. You don't have to have one of these extreme experiences. You don't have to go live in an ashram or go to a mountaintop or do anything different in your life, actually. Many of these experiences can happen spontaneously. And often I don't think we give enough space and appreciation to some of the more mild awakenings that can happen, the more subtle shifts that can take place. So again, if we go back to your question of what is the veil and what is it that's lifting, if it is layers of perception that are shifting and lifting over time, maybe it can happen very smoothly, very, very gracefully. And other times it can be incredibly dramatic, even traumatic for people. And there's no right or wrong way. And there's no predictable timing also as to when these happen. If you want these experiences, and many people yearn for and seek these experiences actively and go on paths of spiritual growth, which is wonderful in human potential and learning, you can't force these experiences. But what you can do is you can create the environment like you would with a beautiful garden. You can create the bed, nourish it, nurture it, plant the seeds, water it, give it love, sing to it, and see what happens. And through that, you increase your chances of those seeds popping through. There are, of course, shortcuts and roads of temptation that are out there. So plant medicine has become incredibly popular these days. Psychedelics we've been using plant medicine since the beginning of time. It's, in all ancient traditions. And The only danger today is that people are doing it in often unsafe environments. And so it might be with someone who doesn't quite know what they're doing, or they haven't done their own work well enough. There might be, well, I know there are total, people who take advantage of people who want to have these experiences. And so they're, giving them substances again in unsafe environments. And so and psychedelics are not the only shortcut, but it's a super shortcut, that one that can often open those perceptions, those portals of perception very quickly. And so if we are not mindful about who we are having these experiences with and how we're having them, even some so-called spiritual communities can be incredibly harmful places. But of course, often it's part of the learning, isn't it? We have to take the steps and take the risks to actually understand what we need to understand. And sometimes we get burnt in our experiences, and then we get the hindsight to look back and go, maybe I could have done that differently, or thank you for the learning for that, and I'll walk this way now. So there's no judgment there in what I'm saying. It's simply that there are so many different paths available to people. And if, those of us that have that genuine desire to seek and open and shift those veils and understand more, choosing pathways that are wholesome and healthful, that feel right, they feel in integrity. When you check in with yourself, that, okay, this feels okay. I trust it in my gut. These are really good indicators to have. And learning discernment for ourselves is so important on this journey, because you have to trust yourself at the end of the day. It's your path. Yeah.
Right. Now, with your research into this, what did you discover about the after effects and the role of personality? I find that really fascinating.
Absolutely. So the after effects, we can break them down into looking at the short-term after effects and the long-term. The short-term are these immediate pieces where, particularly with the stronger experiences like a near-death or a Kundalini experience or something that's quite drastic, we have to deal with these sudden changes. So there might be physical shifts that are going on. The body might be having electric charges or, reintegrating those full-on experiences. Some people go into spontaneous postures. I spoke with one woman who actually got kicked out of her marital bed because her spontaneous postures just kept happening. Her husband couldn't sleep and he just moved her out of the bedroom. And she had no control over these, but of course the yogis knew about these. They call them kriyas. There's a, language around them. So there are physical after effects, there are emotional, there are psychological, there are spiritual, and then there are social. So there's all of these layers of things where after effects can be occurring acutely or in the long term. We can see things like shifts. The relationships are a big one. So one of the things I hear so frequently are people say, I feel isolated, I feel alone, I don't have language, I don't know how to talk about what happened to me, but something happened. Am I going mad? That's one of the biggest ones. I don't think I'm mad. No, I'm not mad, but am I going mad? They think I'm going mad. So, that can be really... it can just completely throw you off your life course. And this is where personality is important, because our personality structure helps us move through life in a way where we can understand parts of the world, process parts of the world, and then take action in the world. It's a wonderful tool. Our ego self and our personality, I think, are wonderful tools that help us navigate humanness. So when something so big happens that shifts everything that we've known up until that point, the personality structure has to integrate, process, reevaluate, heal often pieces that are there, and somehow make peace with and grow into what this new sense of self, this new identity is. So that's why in the short term, there are some sudden pieces around that are very jarring. And again, the relationships in the near-death experience community, the divorce rate is higher than the regular population, which is, the numbers are already big anyway. But the reasons for that are because, one, that language is often not there. Two, some people can have such a shift in their sense of self and their core values that when they start communicating that to their loved ones, their families, or their partner's thinking, this is not the person, who are you? You're not the person I married. And if there was a rift, that can grow even further apart, particularly if the other partner can't be open to what's going on. It doesn't mean they have to understand. It doesn't mean they have to have these experiences themselves. But the openness and the willing to simply be present for the other person as they go through their process is usually enough to keep that relationship together and sometimes strengthen it. But people often realize they just have irreconcilable differences, and it's time. It's just time to move different ways, and that's fine too. Our friendship groups might change, and that can be very traumatic for people when you find you're just not able to go out with the same people and do the same things. You're not interested. The conversations don't match and align with where you find yourself to be now. And you yearn and you hunger for tribe and relationship and people who truly understand you. Now, that doesn't happen overnight. So this is part of that immediate after effect shift into the much longer term. And often people who've had these non-ordinary experiences years later will look back and go, I'm not hanging out with any of the same people anymore. This is my new family now. This is my new tribe. So relationships are key to that. Also in the success of how we can bring out the best of these experiences and honor their wisdom and what they teach us about our own lives, and also align with our core energy and frequency that we get to experience through these. When we shift those who are around us to reflect that back more powerfully and more soundly, we tend to make better progress in life. We feel happier. We feel happier, more fulfilled, etc. We can be in service in better ways. So relationships are key, and then our values. Often these experiences bring someone to very quickly to that sense of what is the most important thing for me right now. And of course, this is why, many in our spiritual communities are talking at this time about the pandemic as a larger spiritual process that's taking place. And there have been many different descriptions of how it's happening, whether it's a spiritual emergency, a metamorphic process, et cetera, et cetera. There's different ideas on it, or even a collective near-death experience, I've heard. The point, though, that I think all of them are getting to is there are perceptions that are being shifted at this point in time because of a larger global climate that is taking place. And in the midst of that too, one of the big things that is happening that is beautiful is many people are saying, what is most important to me right now? Now that I can't travel, now that I can't have these freedoms that I'm so used to doing and having, and many of the distractions that we're used to, what is most important at my core and my center? So that's a more collective process of what takes place for individuals when they go through their own personal experiences. And the beauty of many of these experiences, they're so unique. They're so unique and so perfectly sculpted for that individual and where they're at in their life. And that's why the transformations can be so profound, because it's like the whole universe conspired to give you this one experience to bring about changes and give you invitations to shift, if you want to other ways of being. Yeah.
Yeah, you brought up such an important piece that doesn't really get talked about a lot. And I know I've experienced this, all of my friends have. When you start walking down this path, when you start having these mind-blowing experiences, your relationships really do change. And a lot of times marriages do end. And that's one of the most frightening things to face is, can I fix this? Should I fix this? What am I going to do? And I'm assuming, because you brought it up, that you've worked with people who have faced these truly frightening decisions about what am I going to do about my family? What do you say to people who talk to you about these kinds of things?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's one of the central pieces that I end up working with. I mean, I love working with these experiences themselves and the wisdom and the individual who's had the experience. But of course, what they love to bring through and what's important and pressing for them is the people around them and their relationships, especially when things are not going well. So there are numerous things that I suggest to people and areas that we work through. One is for them to understand the experience themselves and what it means for them, what it's about for them, and what they want to do about it. Maybe there's nothing they want to do about it. It is as it is. Or maybe they feel deeply compelled to make some certain shifts in their life. So I help them get very clear on what is it that you would like to happen within the context of your own experience as the individual. And now, once you're clear on that for you and where you're at, as we look around your periphery, at your partner, your family, your children, your loved ones, your friendship groups, those key people around you that you love and care for, are there any points of conflict or tension that come up? Yes or no? Okay. And if it's a yes, do you want to do anything about it or not? Is that important? Is there something that needs to be addressed, healed, resolved? Sometimes people will get very clear on, there's this person in my life, this is the issue between us, and in order for me to move forward, I feel like this needs to happen. They just get very clear. And so we can, discuss strategies around that. And we can also feel very deeply also into how important it is that a shift does happen. Maybe it's just something within themselves that needs to be shifted, as opposed to, because of course we can't change other people, can we? As much as we might like to, we can't do that. So, to what degree can they use the wisdom of their experiences to become a very conscious activist within that relationship space to make the changes that they truly seek? So do they seek peace in that relationship? Do they want love, harmony, joy? What is the core quality and frequency that they would like to tap into and bring more to that space between themselves and that other person? And that's usually a very fruitful space I find that we can work in. Sometimes it seems like that's the core issue. I want to shift this with that person. But as we get deeper and we dive into it and we feel more into the frequencies, other layers start to emerge where maybe it's really not about that relationship at all. And I find too that when people step more into and honor their core essence and their core self, that there are natural shifts that happen around them. We all have dynamics that we get locked into with the people around us. And these patterns can play out over decades, and everyone has their role within them. Sometimes it's healthy, sometimes it's not. And what can happen is when one of the players shifts how they be within that space, meaning how they react to situations, or how they respond to situations that typically everyone assumes they're going to respond this way or react this way. When that person and that player starts to shift, it's like a game of dominoes, and it can have knock-on effects. So people can be quite frightened, actually, if they shift certain behaviors, knowing it's going to have other implications within their family systems. So I think this is why it's important often for experiencers, once those initial profound after effects kind of subside a bit and there's more space to be with themselves and be with the experience and be reflective of what's going on, to start to flesh out more of those subtle relationship nuances. It can be very fruitful work, but again, these things take time as well. And they take experimentation because you're trying something new. And that's okay, but we can't always predict the outcome. Sometimes we've got to jump in, take a little step, and always to do it in a way where we mean no harm. We come from the best space that we are in. We're just doing our best in each moment, and knowing that there are going to be loved ones in our lives who might not understand at all. They might have no clue where we're coming from, why we're coming from that perspective. I know people that have been completely ostracized within their families. It can be terribly isolating. Others who have made conscious decisions to cut cords and cut ties with key family members. And you might think that on a spiritual path, this might not be the most compassionate or wholesome thing to do. And again, this is why it's really important to get to know each individual and where they're at in their journey, on their life story, and the dynamics at play to come to the best decision in that time from their deepest wisdom in terms of what the next right step is to do. And that's all we can do.
Right. Now we've been talking about the sort of the scary side of this, but there's also some really awesome things that can come of this. Like, how do people that you know, that you've worked with, how do they make the most of the experiences that they've had? I understand you use the word superpowers, which I just love.
Yeah. I love the term superpowers as well. So how do we make the most of them? One, we take time to get to know the experience and understand it. I like to think of them like intimate friends. This is something profound that has happened. It's a gift that has entered us and come through us in some way for some reason. And so it can be really beneficial to take the time to get to know the experience. What was that all about? What on earth happened? Without judging it as a good or a bad experience, because again, people can have bliss-like states and the full love and light, mind-blowing experience there, a so-called heavenly state, and others can have highly distressing ones. And again, what I've found is it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, whether it was beatific or, quite distressing, long-term, pretty much everyone that I've spoken with, there are positive outcomes from those experiences. So without judging it as good or bad, to simply understand it as an experience, it's an experience, and to flesh out from there what is the wisdom that has come through that experience. And then we can start to really move into the exciting step, which is, I'm still alive on this planet Earth right now. I'm in this human form. I've got a body. I've got a mind. I can do things. How can I now take that wisdom, embody it, and put it into practice in the world? And this is how we become better people. This is also how we honor who we are. And the more that we start to do that, and the more that we get comfortable with that, the easier it becomes to settle into the freedom of being ourselves as we are, without these judgments of how we should be, how we ought to be, how we need to behave. But there's an innate confidence that grows. There's an innate joy that comes through when we get to reside in that natural essence and wisdom that we are. And like muscles at the gym, the more you practice it, the stronger it gets, the easier it gets. And then it's this magical snowballing process. People start to come into your life. Experiences happen because you're radiating a particular frequency now that is you. And you're inhabiting that more and more. You're strengthening that. You're doing what you have to do on all levels of the spiritual, the psychic, the emotional, the physical. Super important to work on the physical, especially folks who, might feel a bit this energy-wise, a bit space cadet-wise. Super important to work on the physical, to ground all of that. And as we do that more and more, it becomes intoxicating. It becomes so engaging as well, and magnetic. You will find the universe will conspire in many ways to make incredible things happen. And sometimes course corrections are needed as well. And out of the blue, boom, something's going to happen that might throw you completely off course. And yet when those layers of the veil, when you've had enough layers of that veil that have been opened and shifted and the perspective is wide enough, there comes a point where people are walking the world and they can just say, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now what? So it's all a game of perspective shifting, really, and opening and expansiveness. And reading into and understanding from the great sages of the world, one of the core themes that comes out from what they say is, it's not the experience itself. You know, we can get so easily distracted in the sparkly, interesting features of the actual experience. That's the experience. Let's not get too distracted by that. It's the ordinary, human, everyday part that can be infused with an understanding and the wisdom of the sacred. This is how we live fully. This is how we be on this planet in this opportunity that we get, this little human suit that we get to wear for this short span of time.
All right, beautifully stated. Thank you for that. In fact, I think that's a perfect way to sort of begin to wrap this up because we're running low on time. But I do want to make sure that before we go any further that I mention your website. It's Dr. Nicole Gruel, and that's doctor with no period behind it. It's drNicoleGruel.com. If people are to visit your website, what will they find there?
They will find my latest book for free, The Power of Notes, How Non-Ordinary Experiences Transform the Way We Live, Love and Lead, which is a nice summary of everything we've been talking about here and practical tools as well and how to take those experiences and make the most of them. And you'll find how you can contact me, of course, and how we can work together and different exciting initiatives that I'm involved with and hopefully some good information. I really want that space to be a resource for people, especially when you're having these experiences and you might be at that stage of, what just happened to me? What do I do next? And even much further along the road of, okay, I've been having these experiences for years. I'm ready to shift my whole life into living through that mode and being in full service and showing up completely to address what I feel is important on this planet. So I hope there's a little something for everyone that identifies as a spiritual adventurer in there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Nicole. This has been such a fun conversation. But before I let you go, I want to make sure that there's nothing that we've left out or nothing that's simmering in the back of your brain pan there that we need to cover.
2 words, be you. That's what it all boils down to. That's it. I think we can get very complicated about these topics sometimes because it's interesting and our human mind loves complexity. And really, at essence, this stuff is so simple. Life can be so simple. And I hope that we all get to experience that beauty in the simplicity as we are. I yearn for a day, Lisa, when people are fully embodying who they are at their core and being free to do that and expressing that and bringing through the greater wisdom for us all. I yearn for the world that looks like that because I know that we have only scratched the surface on what we as humans are capable of doing individually and collectively. And boy, when we get us all together and we're tuned in and we're turned on, I hope to be alive for that. And so thank you to you and the network because, it's such a wonderful space as well that is helping in that effort to turn people on, to turn people on and turn people up and make the world a better place. I mean, it all sounds really cheesy, doesn't it? But hey, cheesy's fine.
The whole Gandhi's famous phrase, be the change you wish to see in the world. That's exactly what you're talking about. So thank you for being a model for people to tune into. Thank you again for being with us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
And I want to thank everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation in the Beyond the Veil Summit.
Thank you for joining us for the Beyond the Veil Summit, brought to you by the Shift Network. To learn more, visit beyondtheveilsummit.com. To join our global community of people awakening to their divine humanity and taking inspired action, visit theshiftnetwork.com. Thank you again for gathering with us and for sharing this healing path with your friends and family.